right, well, this week we're starting a brand new teaching series. If you haven't been here before, like I said earlier, my name is Lou. At this point in the series, what we typically do is continue our teaching series or start a new one. And if you're new, this is a great week to be with us because we're starting one brand new. It's going to be a short one. It's 2 weeks long. It's called Real Mature. Real Mature. And so here's how we'll start off, all right? I'd love for you to think about a process that has a final product, right? Like a process of transformation where you can make progress and eventually there's a final product, right? So my wife, her name's Allie. She grew up in Virginia in the South. She's very Southern and was very Southern. And so moving to Long Island, there's been a process of transformation, you know? And you know that if you're not from here, people on Long Island, we're a little different. There's like kind of a different way of doing things. So from where Allie's from, like you don't beep your horn. You just don't. There's like never really a reason to beep on the road. They're very nice and slow on the road. They also greet each other. You don't have to know each other. You don't have to have any past or any relationship. You just say hello to everybody that you see. And it's nice, but it's different. It's very different from Long Island. So when she first got here, we were dating. I brought her home to meet my family. We went out on a walk. We were walking through this little nature trail, and somebody came walking in our direction, a stranger whom we did not know. And we're having conversation. The person's kind of doing their own thing. They get right next to us, and Allie just stops conversation, looks over and is like, hello. And the person was like shocked, thrown off guard, like, do you know me? Did we grow up together? Were we ever in a relationship? Like, why are you greeting me? Totally thrown off. And so, you know, they collected themselves. We moved on. And I just kind of explained, like, yeah, we don't really do that around here. You know, maybe like a little like nod, acknowledgement, but not really much more than that. She still panics when I beep the horn in the car, still, because she's just not used to it. Even if it's just like a, hey, light screen, hello, you know, you don't do that for her. So she's in a process of transformation. She's making a lot of progress. But for the sake of what we're talking about today, like think about, how about lifting weights, right? That's a process. You start lifting weights for the first time. It's a process of transformation. You'll make some progress. You'll realize you can lift a little more weight after a little while. You might see your muscles starting to take shape. But here's a question, like thinking about that specifically, lifting weights. If I go all in with my commitment to that process, all in, like I'm completely devoted to the process of lifting weights. What do you picture when you picture the final product of that process? What do you picture? Think about it. Someone's totally committed, all in, devoted to lifting weights. All right, maybe picture Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Maybe picture Tom Pryor? No, you think of someone, right? Huge muscles, they're jacked, they've got all the shapes, right? Like you can see their back from the front, just big, right? One of those like big people. That's a final product of that process. That's where the road leads. You stay on that road, this is where you'll end up. You commit to that process 110%, this is what you become. So here's the question. When it comes to following Jesus, the process of spiritual growth, if you look at that like a process where you can make progress, if you were to take your level of commitment and dial it up to 100, all the way, all in, completely devoted, totally surrendered, on board, whatever you want to call it. When you picture someone who does that, when you picture the final product of that process, what do you picture? Like if I commit to this process completely, who do I become? It's an important question to ask. And that's really the question we're getting to with this series. It's going to be a short series, 2 weeks. What we're asking is, what does it actually look like? What does it look like to go all in with following Jesus, with that process? Or what does spiritually mature really look like? What is the final product of that process dialed up to 100? So if you were with us last week, you know that we had my friend here. His name is Carl Cool. He's from Kentucky, and he brought his son. His son's name is Logan. Not Logan, that's my son, London. He's also from Kentucky. And so during this service and the third service, London joined the team. He was on our guest services team. He was hanging out with Alex, who's one of the coaches for our guest services team. And they're talking, they're hanging out. All of a sudden, Alex realizes that London hasn't had pizza since he's been on Long Island. He's from Kentucky, right? They don't have Long Island pizza. And she's like, oh no, this is a problem. He was gonna go back later that night. She's like, we gotta get you some pizza. You have to have the Long Island pizza experience. And so Alex is amazing. She somehow figures out a way to get a pizza here for him during the service so that he could have pizza. It was amazing. Do you know where she got the pizza from? Domino's. Domino's. No, she didn't get it from Domino's. She didn't get it. But why is that funny, right? Like, we all know Domino's, it's called pizza. It's called the same thing. It looks like the real thing. It kind of smells like the real thing, but you know, it's nowhere near as good as the real thing. You don't want Domino's. That's not the Long Island pizza experience. Even Allie knows that's not the Long Island pizza experience, right? You want to get pizza from a place where the guy's got like the white apron, you know, dirty white apron. There's a big glass counter. You want to be able to look over the counter and see the person in the back with the pizza, like doing it right there. That's the Long Island. The guy yells at you when he wants to know what you want to order. Like it feels like you're in trouble a little bit. Like that's the Long Island pizza experience. Domino's, it's a convincing counterfeit. And no offense, if you like Domino's, Domino's is great. If you're like a teenager that wants to stay up till 3 a.m. playing video games, that's where you eat Domino's. But it's not the Long Island pizza experience. For some of us, the picture that comes to mind when you picture the final product of being completely devoted or committed to following Jesus, for some of us, that picture is a Domino's pizza picture. It's called the same thing, right? It might look kind of like the same thing. It might sound kind of like the same thing. It might smell kind of like the same thing, but it's really nowhere near as good as the real thing. And the reason that matters is because if you're someone who's like, maybe church isn't your thing, maybe you don't totally believe this, maybe someone asked you to come here today, you're just doing them a favor, this isn't your situation, maybe the thing that's stopping you from taking a step in the direction of Jesus is where you think this ultimately leads. Like, I'm not gonna get on that road if this is where that road leads. If this is who I'm supposed to become if I go all into this. Or maybe you're on board with the whole Jesus thing. Maybe you've taken a step in his direction. Maybe you've been baptized or you've joined a group or you started coming to church. You made this a regular thing. Maybe you're curious, but maybe your hesitation really comes down to the picture that you picture when you picture who you're supposed to become. Right? Maybe your hesitation to move forward, to take the next step, to increase your level of commitment, whatever that may be, is because, well, I don't want to become that. And I'd argue that if the picture that you picture is not an attractive picture, it's not something that you're drawn to, then it may be the Domino's pizza version of Christianity. The Domino's pizza version of the process. Now, unfortunately, but fortunately for us, this issue of convincing counterfeits of Christianity, like the Domino's pizza version of faith, this is an issue that's not a new issue. It's been around pretty much as long as the church has been around. We have ancient documents written by ancient teachers who addressed this issue making its way into church. The Domino's Pizza version of Christianity, a convincing counterfeit of Christianity. One of those teachers is a guy by the name of Paul. We call him the Apostle Paul or Saint Paul. He's someone who started a lot of churches. And then he wrote letters to churches that he started and some churches that he didn't start. But he was often helping them in their own development or addressing a problem that their church was experiencing. There was a church in the region of Galatia that was dealing with this issue. They had a version of faith, but it wasn't the real version. It wasn't nearly as good as the real thing. And so he writes a letter to them correcting this issue. And it's his most intense, honestly, it's his angriest letter. Like most of his letters, he starts out with all these nice compliments, like, oh, I just thank God every time I think about you, and I'm so grateful for your love and your faith, and you do this. With this letter, he just like gets right to it. Like, there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And here's what he says. You should read this on your own. It's in the letter to the Galatians. He says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ. He's saying, I'm so surprised, I'm so astonished that you're so quickly deserting God, right, who invited you to live in the favor, the loving kindness of Jesus, and are turning to, okay, now hold on a second before we go on. Think about this, right? If you're like me, I'm thinking, okay, this church leader, right, this like super religious person who's addressing this group of church people, and he's saying they have turned away from God. They have deserted him and turned to something else. What would you typically think they've turned to, right? If you're like me, I'm thinking they've turned to moral corruption. They've turned to rebellion. They're breaking all of the rules. They stopped doing all the religious stuff. And so he's angry. But that's not what he says. They're not doing like bad stuff. He says you're turning to a different gospel. He's saying you've turned to a different version of Christianity. Like if you were to take all of Jesus' teachings, the whole thing, and put it under one umbrella, he would call it the gospel. That means good news. Good news. And he's saying you've turned to a different one. You've bought into a convincing counterfeit, the Domino's Pizza version. And it's a problem for him. He says you've turned to another gospel, which is really no gospel at all, he says. It's not really good news. It's a convincing counterfeit. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Not deny, not say it's not real, not tell you to go do something else, but they've twisted it. They didn't delete it, they distorted it. If you look into what's going on in the church, you can, like I said, you can read the letter for yourself. The issue is that people have come into the church and started teaching that the way to be right with God is to obey all the rules and keep all the religious practices. And this is what he's so angry about. This is not typically what like people of faith get angry about. Like you'd think he's upset about their horrible behavior, but he's like, no. You've accepted a convincing counterfeit version. A counterfeit version that produces the final product of this is someone who's outwardly religious, obeying all the religious rules, and they become that way by obsessive rule keeping. Like for them at that time, it was obsession with the ancient law, a moral code. And they believed that to be right with God, you had to obey the moral code. And what that produced was outwardly religious people who were obsessed with rule keeping. At the heart of this, and this is important, at the heart of this was the belief that God accepts people who obey him. Or if I obey God, he will accept me. And so they live in bondage to this law, thinking that that's the way you get in with God. In fact, the way he describes it, he says it's like you're in slavery. You're in bondage to the code of right and wrong. And it traps you in this cycle. And some of you know this because you've been there. I've been there. When you start thinking this way, like I'm right with God if I do all the right things, you enter into this cycle, okay? This is very common in churches. It's a cycle of motivation, condemnation, and rededication, right? Like you hear a song, you hear a talk, you hear something, it's like, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna God's great, and so I'm gonna do all the right stuff, right? To be good with God. And then you blow it, because you're gonna. And then you beat yourself up. That's the condemnation stage, right? You feel shame, you feel horrible, like I'm never gonna be good enough. Then there's this rededication thing. Maybe you hear another great song. You're like, okay, no, actually I can do it. So now we're back at motivation, but then you blow it again. And your spiritual journey, it just looks like crazy ups and downs. And it's because the basis of your understanding with God is your performance. It's about how well you're doing. It feels like a burden, like a weight, like a trap, something you want to get out from under. And at the end of the day, the understanding is that it's all the requirement for God's love. If you want to be in with God, you want God to like you, you got to do all the right things. Now, that process of obsessive rule keeping that turns you into someone who's outwardly religious, checking all the right boxes, doing all the right things, if you commit yourself to that process, dial it up to 100, and it gets ugly. It gets ugly. In fact, when Jesus was around, his opponents, the people that he had issues with, were people who did this, who were about the outward religious life and the obsessive rule keeping. Those were his opponents. And it turns you, if you buy into that, not only does it do this to your spiritual life, but it turns you into someone who's anxious when it comes to your understanding of God. Like you hope you're obeying the rules enough to be okay with him. Really, all you're left with is the ability to compare yourself to some other people. Like, well, at least I'm not as bad as them. Right? And so what then happens is you become judgmental. It feels like a weight. It feels like a burden that you carry. And it's produced by this process with the belief that if I obey God, he'll accept me. We had a meeting a few weeks ago, probably maybe almost 2 months ago at this point. Sometimes to get ready for a series, I'll bring a bunch of people into a room, people that some work at the church, some go to the church, some from the community, but just kind of talk about a topic to prepare for a series, to see where people are on certain things. And so we had a meeting about this series where we talked about real maturity. What does it look like when you go all in your understanding of Jesus? You go all in, completely committed to the process of spiritual devotion. And the people that I had in the room were people who were new to faith, new to following Jesus. We're on board, not resistant, on board. Most of them had been baptized, but we're still just starting out. And I said, okay, so if you picture someone who goes all the way, who cranks it up to 100, all in, how do you describe that person in one word? And the words that we got were, I literally wrote these down off the whiteboard from the meeting. Out of touch, unapproachable, intimidating, unrelatable, exclusive, they only hang out with like-minded people, judgmental, they look down and compare themselves to the behaviors of other people, unreasonable and unreachable standards, cold, close-minded. And everyone had a story. I worked with someone like that who was so outwardly religious. Or I lived with someone, or I knew someone, or I saw someone on TV, and I saw them and just thought I don't want to be that. And if that's where you think this road leads, if that's what you think going all the way for Jesus, if that's what you think it looks like, that's a Domino's pizza version. It might be called the same thing. It might kind of look the same way. And those people probably have the best of intentions, but they're committed to the wrong process. And so, what does it look like? Well, Paul explains what it looks like in the letter. He says, first he explains how relating to God, like being right with God, is not based on getting it all right, doing all the right thing. He says, for through the law, like the moral code, I died to the law so that I might live for God, right? He's like, as far as I'm concerned, the law's dead. As far as the law is concerned, I'm dead. Like it's not existent. I don't have to live that way, in bondage to right and wrong. So I'm free to live for God. He says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, okay? Now what he's saying here, he's not saying like he was one of the thieves on the cross next to Jesus. He's saying that he so identifies himself with who Jesus is and what he's done. He says, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Jesus lives through me. For him, this is the picture. For us, this is the picture. This is the picture of the final product. This is what we're going for. This is what real maturity, all in, complete devotion, dialed to 100, it looks like. Jesus living through you. Or to put it in English, it's becoming like Jesus. And so what was Jesus like? You could read his biographies, what we call the Gospels. He was love. Like his closest friend just described him as love. He was for people. He was joy. Like he had an enjoyment of life that other people seemed to lack. He was peace. He had a non-anxious presence. There's a theologian named Dallas Willard. He said if he had to describe Jesus in one word, he would use the word relaxed. Like love, joy, peace. He was patient with people. He was kind. There was a goodness about him, and people were drawn to him. That's the picture of what complete devotion looks like. It's becoming like Jesus. And interestingly enough, he was nothing like the list that I rattled off before. He wasn't unapproachable. He wasn't unrelatable. He wasn't cold or closed-minded or judgmental. Like that's the picture of what we're going for. That's the picture that should come to mind when you think of someone who's all in for Jesus. Not someone who's outwardly religious. Someone who's becoming like Jesus. And so for me, I'm like, okay, I need it to be a little bit more concrete. Like that's nice. I can agree with that. I'm on board with that. Fine. It's not about obsessive rule keeping. It's about becoming more like Jesus. So how do we get there? Well, he like displays this process, like how to actually get there. It's not just by trying to be like Jesus. He says, I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but here it is, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, first part. I live by faith in the Son of God, second part. Who loved me and gave himself for me, third part. These are 3 parts of the process. And it's a process that you and I are probably more familiar with than we realize. This is the process of becoming like Jesus, right? Here's what I mean. Let's give it some color. Ready? Whoosh. Green, yellow, red. Okay? Remember that. The life I now live in the body. Green, I live by faith in the Son of God. Yellow, who loved me and gave himself for me. Red. Okay? The life I live in the body, the things I do, my actions, my choices, we can put them under the category of obeying God, right? I live by faith in the Son of God. We can put that under the category of trust. Who loved me and gave himself for me. That's something about him. We can put that under the category of know, right? And so Paul flipped the order of it here. But what he's saying is there's someone who loved me and gave himself for me. He's good, he's for me, he wants good for me. Because of that, I can trust him. The life I now live, I live by faith. That's literally the word trust. And so because of that, I'll listen to him. The life I now live, the choices I make. We don't want to obey someone we don't trust. And we don't trust someone we don't know. In other words, there is effort to becoming like Jesus. It's not easy. It's not easy. But the effort in the process of becoming like Jesus is in this process. It's in getting to know him to the point that you begin to trust him. And when you take a step of obedience, like a do, it comes from a place of trust. It's rooted in trust. Some of us were presented a version of Christianity that started with obey. Like, hey, welcome to church. Here are the rules. Obey. And it felt unnatural, and you took a step back because it is unnatural. Just like if you met a stranger on the street who was like, hey, obey. It would be like, hold on a second. I don't trust you because I don't know you. But according to Paul and what we see in all the rest of the New Testament, we're invited to get to know the goodness of God. And then we learn to trust him. And then from there, we begin to take steps of obedience, all right? So let's make it like real practical. Let's say we're talking about forgiveness, okay? Forgiveness is hard. Somebody wrongs you. It's not natural to forgive them. Most people don't want to do that. And so maybe you showed up to church and it was like, hey, forgive. And it was like, I don't want to do that. It doesn't feel right. Well, God wants you to forgive. Like, okay. And now it just feels like you're submitting to these arbitrary rules of a God who wants you to do things that don't feel natural to you. But if you start with, okay, this is coming from someone who not only forgave me, but who loved himself, who loved me and gave himself. Didn't just give me stuff, but gave all of himself for me to show me that he's for me. Maybe I can trust that. And from there, even though it's unnatural and it's not fun, you take a step and say, okay, I'm functioning, not because there's a rule I have to obey to be right with God, but I'm taking a step in trust, and I'm going to try and forgive this person. That's what a decision looks like when it's made through this process. And you know what happens? It's going to be hard, and the feelings are still going to come to the surface, and you have to forgive them over and over and over again. But what you see is, you know what? I'm not carrying the anger I used to carry. Like, I don't feel like I have to carry that grudge with them. I don't feel awkward when they're around. Like, you see there's something good and life-giving about this. And what it does is increase your trust in him. Because you see, he wanted good for you. Right? Or let's take one that's a little bit more exciting. Let's talk about sexual boundaries. Right? Maybe some of you showed up to church and it was like, hey, everyone else is doing that, but don't do that because you're into church now. And it feels like you feel like a caged bird. Like you can't have all the fun that everyone else is having. And there's a desire to break free and just go do what you want. That's what happens when you're hit with the obey, obey, obey. But if you start with like, okay, there is a God who loved me and gave himself for me. Who is good, who's for me, who wants good for me. And maybe I can trust him. And so yeah, like I know what I want to do, but maybe there's someone who is more committed to my flourishing than I'm committed to my flourishing. Who cares more about me than I care about me. Who cares more about the people in my life and the health of my relationships more than I do. All right, I'm going to obey him. And it doesn't feel natural. And you may not see the value of it at first, but over time you realize, you know, I don't have as many secrets to keep. I don't have to hide my story. I don't have to have that talk with this person that I'm in this relationship with because of, and you see like this was not a restriction. It was a boundary that led to life. But it's very different than just being told, hey, here's what's right and wrong. And if you do the wrong thing, then you're not in good with God, sorry. At the heart of this, what we call the gospel, at the heart of this is not the belief that if I obey God, he'll accept me, but that God accepts me. And because of that, I obey him. Because he's shown me that he's for me. He's in my corner. And all of it is not the requirement for his love, it's the response to it. And you know what it feels like, Paul says? Not slavery. He says it feels like freedom. And it still requires effort because it's not easy to take a step of trust when you're not sure what's on the other side. But it's very different. It's very different than just doing something because God says so and you're worried about what's going to happen if you don't do it. And so all of this, like, it starts with putting your effort into knowing and trusting. Becoming like Jesus, like this is the picture of the final product. And that happens through being with him, through getting to know him. We did a whole series on this. It was called The Way. We don't have time to go into it today. But the idea is to get to know him, right? Make attending church a habit. Join a group. Make a friend that you could talk to with, like, about your doubts and struggles. Start reading and praying on your own. Get to know the goodness of God. And when you commit to this process, you go all the way with this process, all in. The Apostle Paul says in chapter 5 of this letter, he says, there will be fruit in your life. There will be fruit that comes from this, like the result of this. He says, and that fruit, it's love, it's joy, it's peace, it's patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. It's all the things that Jesus is. That's the fruit of being with him, becoming like him. In other words, the final product, when you picture where this road leads, if you stay on it long enough, it's not someone who's outwardly religious, but inwardly transformed. And I don't know about you, but with those things I just described, the fruit, like what we're saying here, what Paul's saying here, what Jesus taught, is that you embracing him all the way, going all in, it leads to the best possible version of yourself. A version that's more loving, like more for people, more joyful, more peaceful, more patient, more kind. It's something worth going all in for. We're out of time, so I'm going to ask the band to come back up here. We're going to go more into this next week. We'll talk about how real maturity is perceived by people around us. But like this whole thing, this whole series, it came from a number of conversations, or I should say the same conversation that came up over and over and over again with different people getting into church. It was the conversation or the story where you'd hear about someone who's totally super Christian, right? They'd say like, oh, I know someone. I work with someone. I live with someone. I saw that person on TV. They're all the way. They're all about Jesus. They're super Christian. They go to church 8 days a week. They pray fancy. They know all the Bible verses. They got all the stuff, all the gear. It's all Jesus all the time. But they're not nice. Or they walk around like they're better than everyone else. Whenever they're going to be around, I got to have the conversation with the rest of my friends. Like, all right, just so you know, he's coming. He's a nice guy. He means well. He's a little, like you got to have the disclaimer conversation or the explain yourself conversation afterwards. And I've been there. Like I've been that person for a season. And that's not the picture of where this road should lead. If the picture is not Jesus, if it's not of someone more loving, more joyful, more peaceful, more patient, more kind, someone you want to be around, then it's the Domino's pizza version. Might be called the same thing. Might look the same way, might smell the same way. But it's nowhere near as good as the real thing.